which is very helpful when you're looking through all these kick drums, because now you're not just going through them one at a time being like, that one, no, that one, no, that one, no. You have something specific that you're looking for. Today, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different from my normal videos. I wanted to walk through my process for recreating tracks in all the styles that I do for multiple reasons. First of all, it's a way to say thank you for 1,000 subscribers. By this point, the channel has probably already gone past that, so thank you. But even beyond that, I feel like it could be really beneficial for a lot of people. Excuse my inner Devin Nash. But let's just start out with why even bother learning how to remake somebody else's song? And there's actually quite a few reasons for this. First group is going to be beginning producers. Honestly, this is the go-to advice for a lot of producers who are trying to teach people how to make productions sound better or how to develop yourself as a producer, is to just kind of copy what other people do over and over again, because after a while, your ability to imitate people will actually give you the experience you need to go out and do stuff that sounds like yourself. The next people that this will help out are experienced producers, mainly because the things you need to be able to do in order to replicate a track are things that will also make you a better producer / mixing engineer as a whole. When you start remaking tracks, something kind of cool that happens is it sort of expands your vocabulary for the things that you can use in your own productions. Anybody who's checked out my channel before already knows that I love Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon, and it sort of follows through with this mindset of the more you're able to borrow from other people in very different contexts than your own, you're able to sort of blend those things into what you're doing. And if you do that often enough from various different places, people eventually will be like, oh my gosh, you sound so original. So that's why I think it's genuinely a good practice to, every once in a while, if you have a track that you enjoy, just see if you can break down the production and recreate it. Now that I've made my case for it, let's actually jump into what my process looks like. So we start out with step 1, which is a detailed listening. And when I say detailed, I mean literally pull up a pen and a pad of paper, turn on the highest fidelity version of the song that you can find, and just start taking notes about everything you can hear. List off as many elements and layers as you can. This is super important because a lot of the times when we're using our ears to listen to music as a music listener, we're not really using our hyper detailed music producer ears. And so there are many songs that I've done this process with that I've heard hundreds of times, but when I forced myself to sit down and listen to it in this manner, there were elements about those songs that I had never noticed before and actually made me appreciate them a lot more. If you can, I would recommend trying to find something like Tidal, just because with a lot of the tracks that you have with them, they're actually like lossless FLAC files. And I know a lot of people can be very nitpicky about audio quality needlessly, and it can be like, well, what's the point? But genuinely, when you listen to the FLAC version of these masters, which are 44.1, on the master quality, it's not just that the song sounds better. There are actual details of the song that are obfuscated from you that you can't really hear when you're listening to the compressed MP3 version. Like when I did the video for I'm in Love with You by the 1975, there were straight up instruments in the original mix that popped out at me that I couldn't even really hear in the MP3 version on Spotify. So step 1 is start out with a very detailed listening, which then goes to step 2, the bare bones of a track. This is normally what I'm doing with my own production clients when I'm starting on one of their songs, is I'm not worrying about the vocal throws or what exact delay patch I'm using. I'm focusing on the main pillars of the song. What are the recognizable elements? What are the main supports that are holding up a majority of the song? If I'm doing stuff that's more of like an indie rock band thing, it might just be drums, bass, and guitars, maybe a couple of guitar layers, because that normally adds a lot to the vibe of a sound, but see how far you can get it with as few details as possible. You can also think of it as breaking down the simple elements that make a song, like the chords, the drum beat, and the melody, and just focus on those instruments that are important on getting those key factors to come through. And I think it's really important to focus on this first, because it can be really easy to go down a rabbit trail of sound designing a synthesizer that you use for this one throw at the end of verse 1, but then you never touch again. And you spent 15 minutes getting that one patch to sound right, but now you've used a lot of steam and you still don't really have like the main guitar line in the track yet. So I think it's best to just approach it from an eagle eye view and be like, what are the important parts that need to be here? Let's do that first. And the next part of the process is taking breaks. For me personally, this this is the most important part of the process. Whenever I've done a track recreation, I have never done the whole track in the same day. Literally every single track that I've recreated, it was just a quick little 30-minute session followed by revisiting it the next day for another session, and then maybe a third or fourth one. And that's it. This part of the process is super important for me because in my experience, this has been the only way to reliably get objectivity when I'm working by myself. When you get really focused on the detailed production stuff in a track, you're having to zoom in so close on it that it's really easy to get lost in it all. You've been focusing on this snare drum so much that you've kind of lost perspective on whether or not the song slaps or not. And so the only way that you can really get that objectivity back again is to leave and come back to it at a later point. One of my favorite breaks is going on long walks, listening to music that I really like, because it gets me back in that sort of like vibe state where I'm thinking about production in a very untechnical way, and I'm just focused on the vibe. You might also want to break up your sessions over a few days. And after you come back from your break, I would check your reference again. But I would only focus on the major issues. Like, is there an instrument missing that you forgot about? Does your bass have way too much sub in it compared to the actual track? Again, this is where having a really high quality reference can really help. And after I've done this step, it really sets you up to dive into the nitty-gritty details, which is the next step. This is where we're going to start getting a little bit more detailed with our production, focus on the things that are not necessarily the big building blocks, but cumulatively, they create that last 10 to 20% of the track, which really brings out the identity of the song. This could be like effects, automation, ear candy, and really highly involved sound design. That stuff does need to be done, but I find that it tends to be easier to do that stuff when a majority of the meat of the track is already there. And honestly, depending on how well your sessions are going, you might have to repeat these two steps over and over and over again. You spend some time on it, and then after a while, you take a break, either over a few days or with a long walk. You come back to it, you check your reference, and then you jump back into it. There's been a couple of tracks on this channel where I've had to jump through that a couple of times, and there isn't really a final step per se with this stuff, as much as there's like a vibe check that's constantly going on. So like once it kind of passes the vibe check, you're kind of good. Whenever I did my videos, I would always get them to the point of passing the vibe check from like a song listener standpoint, and then I would have another day set aside to like remix it and to do all my session prep and make stuff look pretty for videos. You probably don't need to do that. But yeah, that's an overview of how I do it. But I want to jump into some of the details that can really help you when you're jumping through steps 1 and steps 4. All right, first thing that helps is being familiar with the kinds of musical elements that are used in the niche of music that you're making. So in other words, if you're making Drake style beats, knowing what an 808 drum machine is, or the different kinds of sub basses and Reese basses, or different kinds of drum sample libraries, that kind of knowledge is really going to help you. Like when we're using our drums, are we using basic sort of Lex Luger stuff that has a really nice timeless feel? Or are we going for something that's a little bit more sound cloudy and obnoxious and in your face? And I just used a hip hop example there, but this kind of translates for any genre that you're in. All right, if you're an indie pop guitarist, knowing what a Fender Twin sounds like versus a Marshall is going to help you a lot. Or just start developing an active vocabulary for all the different buzzwords that producers are using in that genre. Like from my days of listening to a bunch of Warped Tour bands, I know that when somebody says the Warped Tour Sans Amp sound, I know that they're talking about a bass tone with an active pickup bass where the low end is really compressed and the mids and the highs are really distorted. And if I was going to use a tone like that, I would probably use something like Parallax, which is this plugin here, not because I don't have a Sans Amp, but because I'm familiar with the vocabulary in that genre and I know the sound that they're going for and how to get it. The next thing that will really help you is understanding the texture of different sounds. And for anybody who doesn't understand what I'm talking about, the different ranges of the frequency spectrum are not just for engineers or people nerding out over is this in phase or not. Different frequencies being brought up can actually bring out different emotions in a sound. So for example, in this sort of like sub 100 hertz range, we call that low end, but it's really more so that subby low end that rattles a room. But just above that in this 150 range, we also call that low end, but it's less of that subby low end that rattles a car stereo and more so the thing that brings out clarity in a bass. And the same kind of goes for a lot of these different spectrums. This is where you get a lot of mud. This is where you can get a lot of high-end harshness. This is where you can get a lot of that air. And there's just different ranges of it and every single range in between. And what you're going to find in your quest to remake a song is that it's really helpful to think of your production elements in this sort of EQ spectrum kind of way in a very broad sense. So for example, if I'm trying to recreate a hip hop song and I'm trying to look for a kick drum, like if I click click on hip hop kick drums on Splice, it's gonna bring up everything from decap to abstract hip hop to bedroom pop to Lex Luger. Like, it's all over the place. And so a better way to think of your sounds is to think of them in terms of their texture in the frequency spectrum. For example, I can listen to a sound, kind of vaguely put it in a category similar to what we were talking about before. Like, okay, this is a Drake style kick drum, or this is a Biggie Smalls style kick drum. You can just start going through the spectrum of like, okay, how is the subby low end? Well, in this track, the kick doesn't really have a whole lot of subby low end, so I'm gonna be looking for a sample that doesn't have as much low end rattle, or at the very least, a sample where I can dial that out if I need to. How much clarity does it have in the low end? It actually has quite a bit, so I'm gonna be looking for a sample that has a bit more of this. What does the top of the kick drum sound like? Well, it has a lot of air, but it kind of doesn't have a lot of that clicky harshness. So already here, we've built up a profile for the kind of kick drum that we are looking for, which is very helpful when you're looking through all these kick drums, because now you're not just going through them one at a time being like, that one, no, that one, no, that one, no. You have something specific that you're looking for. And again, going back to the first point, once you have experience with how to use that kind of a kick drum, that's knowledge that you now have that you can bring into other productions. So if you're doing a similar style track, either for a client or for your own music, you now have that ability to be like, okay, I know what kind of kick drum I'm looking for because I've worked on a track before and I was looking for something like this, and when I dropped it in, it worked. And I use this frequency technique all the time on kick drums, snares, guitar layers, basses. And when you start getting to the final stages of niche elements, most of the time it's just dialing in these little ranges. So maybe the guitar that you picked has a little bit too much 1K in it, and part of your tweaking and adjustment phase is just bringing that down a little bit. And the more experience you have with stuff like this, the more details you will care about because you'll actually be able to hear them. So the same way that I talked about that EQ spectrum thing, I go through that now with compression. Like, how in your face does this element feel? Whether it's a guitar or a bass or a synth. So when I'm asking myself, do I want to use the purple compressor or the 1176 from Arturia, or honestly even the stock compressor, it's based off of the texture that I'm wanting to hear out of the sound. And I know what I want because I have experience looking for something like that. How would you start doing something like this? My recommendation would be to start out simple. Start out trying to replicate a song like once a week. And it doesn't need to be super intensive. I would start out with 3 to 4 sessions that are about 30 minutes long and just see how far you can get with that. Like, if you're somebody who gets caught up in the details, get yourself a timer and see how far you can push yourself in 30 minutes. Because when you focus on the things that are actually important in a production, you'll actually be surprised by how many of them you can get done in less than 30 minutes. Like for the 1975 video where I did I'm in Love with You, I got all of the drums, the bass, and all of the major guitar layers done in like 20 minutes. And that's not a flex on me working fast. It's just I focused on what was important and I saved all of the niche elements for a different session. But yeah, if you want to start leveling up your production skills, start making a Spotify playlist of songs that you want to recreate, things that inspire you, and just start diving into them. Because I guarantee you diving into it is going to make so much more differences to your productions than you sitting there thinking, well, how did they do that? But yeah, that's how I do it. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful. If you enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe, all the bell icons and stuff like that. If you guys enjoyed these kinds of videos, let me know. I love doing educational stuff like this, where I'm not just doing track breakdowns. Part of my mission is to equip artists who want to become self-reliant. So if that means teaching people how I produce stuff so that they can do it themselves, I love doing stuff like that. And this is a video that YouTube thinks that you would enjoy from me. But yeah, I will see you guys next week. See you later.